In a city that never sleeps, filled with millions of stories, most are forgotten before they even begin. This is the story of Amelia Russo, a woman whose world had shrunk to the size of a greasy spoon diner and the four walls of a cramped apartment. Every day was a battle for survival, a marathon of aching feet and a soul worn thin. She had nothing. Yet she gave what little she had to a man who had even less, a crippled silent beggar huddled in the alley behind her work. She offered him food warmth and a sliver of human dignity. She never asked for his name. She never expected a thank you. But she was about to find out that the man in the rags held a secret that would shatter her reality and rewrite her future forever. The neon sign of the Corner Nook Diner flickered, casting a sickly pink and green glow onto the rain-slicked pavement of Oakhaven's less-than-glamorous district. For Amelia Mia Russo, that sign wasn't a beacon of cozy late-night comfort. It was the relentless metronome marking the beat of her life. A life measured in coffee refills, sticky syrup spills, and the phantom ache in her lower back that never truly went away. At 24, Mia possessed a quiet beauty that was often overlooked, smudged out by exhaustion. Her dark, wavy hair was perpetually tied back in a messy bun, and her large, expressive brown eyes, which should have been full of youthful dreams, were clouded with a deep, perpetual worry. Her world was a relentless cycle, a 12-hour shift at the diner, a crowded bus ride home, and a few precious, painful hours with her mother, Maria. Maria Russo was once a vibrant woman with a laugh that could fill a room. Now multiple sclerosis was cruelly, methodically stealing her from the inside out. She was confined to a hospital bed that took up most of their tiny living room, a constant heartbreaking reminder of the mountain of medical debt that grew taller with every passing day. Every dollar Mia earned was a drop in an ocean of expenses. Her own dreams of becoming a pediatric nurse were locked away in a dusty box, another casualty of circumstance. Her boss, Mr. Henderson, was a man whose personality perfectly matched the congealed grease in the diner's trap. He was short, balding, and perpetually sweating, with a sneer that seemed permanently etched onto his face. He watched Mia like a hawk, his beady eyes missing nothing. Russo, he'd bark his voice, a gravelly annoyance. "Table 4 needs a check. You're not getting paid to daydream." "Move it!" Her co-worker Jessica was a different kind of poison. Sharp blonde, and with a tongue to match, she saw Mia's quiet diligence, not as a virtue, but as a weakness to be exploited. She'd take the tables with the big tippers conveniently disappear when a large family with messy children came in and whisper about Mia to the cook, loud enough for her to hear. "Poor little Mia," she'd say with mock sympathy, still trying to save her mommy. "It's so tragic. You'd think she'd find a rich man instead of slinging hash." Maya learned to build a wall around herself. She'd nod, she'd smile, her tired waitress smile, and she'd retreat into the quiet fortress of her mind. The only respite in her day, the only moment that felt truly her own, came at the end of her shift. It was a ritual, born of a single cold evening 3 months prior. She had been taking out the trash, her body screaming for rest when she saw him. Tucked into the grimy alcove by the dumpsters, a space shielded from the worst of the wind, was a man. He was a heap of faded, torn blankets and a stained army surplus jacket. His face was obscured by a thick, matted beard and long, unkempt dark hair, but what struck her was his stillness and his leg. It was stretched out, stiffly, wrapped in what looked like dirty rags propped up on a milk crate. He appeared to be crippled, unable to bend his knee. He never made a sound, never rattled a cup for change, never met anyone's eye. He just existed. A ghost in the alley. That first night, something in her broke. She looked at this broken man, and she didn't feel pity or disgust. She felt a kinship. They were both trapped just in different ways. Without a second thought, she went back inside. Henderson was gone for the night, and Jessica was busy flirting with a customer. Mia took a clean bowl, ladled it full of the unsold beef stew, thick with potatoes and carrots, still hot, and grabbed a plastic spoon and a few slices of bread. Her hands trembled as she approached him. "Excuse me," she'd whispered. The man flinched, his head snapping up. For a fleeting moment, his eyes met hers. They weren't the vacant, desperate eyes she expected. They were a startlingly clear shade of blue, and for a split second, they held an intelligence, a sharpness that seemed utterly out of place. Then, just as quickly, the light was gone, replaced by a guarded, animalistic fear. She placed the bowl down, gently, a safe distance from him. "It's from the diner," she said softly. It's good. It'll just get thrown out, otherwise." He didn't move. He just watched her, his expression unreadable. Mia backed away slowly and left. The next morning, the bowl was there, wiped clean, sitting neatly by the dumpster. And so the ritual began. Every single night, Monday through Saturday, Mia would bring him a meal. Sometimes it was soup, sometimes a burger that had been made by mistake, sometimes just a pile of fries and a couple of bread rolls. She never knew his name, and he never spoke a word. Their entire communication was this silent transaction of kindness. Jessica noticed, of course. "Are you insane?" she hissed one night, watching Mia prepare a plate. "You're feeding that creep. Henderson will fire you if he finds out you're stealing food." "It's leftovers, Jessica." "It's going in the garbage," Mia replied, not looking at her. "He's probably a drug addict, or crazy. One day he's going to follow you home, you know." Mia ignored her. The man in the alley wasn't a threat. In a strange way, he was her anchor. He was the one person in her life she could do something for. She couldn't cure her mother. She couldn't pay off her debt. She couldn't escape the diner. But she could feed this silent, broken man. It was a small act of control in a life that was spiraling out of it. Over the weeks, tiny changes occurred. He no longer flinched when she approached. He would give her a slight, almost imperceptible nod. One evening, after a particularly grueling shift where Henderson had docked her pay for a broken plate, Mia sat on the steps of the back exit, just a few feet from him, and cried. She didn't sob loudly, just silent, hot tears of frustration, tracking paths through the day's grime on her cheeks. She didn't acknowledge him, and he didn't move. But when she finally got up to leave, she noticed a small, smooth, grey stone placed on the step where her bag had been. It was perfectly ordinary, yet it had been polished to a soft sheen, as if rubbed by a thumb for hours. She picked it up and closed her fist around it. It was the first gift she had received in years. Another time, after a week of torrential rain, she brought him his food and a dry pair of socks she'd bought at the dollar store. The next morning, tucked into the clean, empty bowl, was a single, perfectly pressed wildflower, its purple hue still vibrant. He was communicating. He was saying thank you in the only way he could. Her silent friend in the alley became the focal point of a strange, secret life. She started talking to him, soft monologues into the evening air. She told him about her mother's good days and bad days. She complained about Henderson. She confessed her fears about the future. He was the perfect confidant, a silent witness to her struggles. His steady, quiet presence was more comforting than any platitude-filled advice from a well-meaning stranger. One chilly October night, the air had the sharp bite of impending winter. The diner's heating was on the fritz again, and Mia had been shivering all day. Her own jacket was thin, a hand-me-down from a charity shop. When she went out back, she saw him shivering violently, his thin blankets no match for the damp cold that seeped from the concrete. His crippled leg was uncovered, the skin mottled and blue. It was an impulsive act, one driven by a force she didn't understand. She took off her jacket. Here she said, her voice firm. She walked closer than she ever had before and draped it over his shoulders. He looked up, his blue eyes wide with shock. The guardedness was gone, replaced by raw, utter astonishment. "You need it more than I do," she said, her teeth chattering slightly. "Please, keep it." She turned to leave, but a voice stopped her. It was rough, cracked from disuse, but deep and clear. "Wait." Mia froze, her heart hammering against her ribs. She turned back slowly. He was looking directly at her, the jacket clutched in his hands. He pushed himself up a little straighter. "Thank you," he rasped. It was the first time he had spoken. Just 2 words, but they landed with the force of a thunderclap in the silent alley. For the first time, she saw him, not as a collection of rags and a disability, but as a man. A man with a voice. A man with eyes that held a universe of secrets. She could only nod her own voice, caught in her throat, before she hurried away, her mind reeling. The silent contract had been broken. Something had changed forever in the alley behind the Corner Nook diner. She didn't know it yet, but she had just set in motion a chain of events that would unravel everything she thought she knew about her life, his, and the very nature of kindness. The 2 words echoed in Mia's mind for days. "Thank you." They replayed on a loop during the clatter of dishes, the sizzle of the grill, and the drone of the late-night bus. The barrier of silence had been breached, and the alley no longer felt like a place of quiet refuge, but one of burgeoning mystery. Her ritual continued, but it was different now, charged with a new tension. When she brought him his food the next night, she was nervous. Would he speak again? He was wearing her jacket. It was too small for his broad frame, but he had it zipped up his hands, tucked into its pockets. As she set down the plate of leftover meatloaf, he looked up, and this time he held her gaze. "Amelia," he said. His voice was still rough, but stronger than before. Mia's breath hitched. How do you know my name?" A faint, wry smile touched his lips, barely visible beneath the beard. "Your boss isn't exactly discreet when he's yelling." A blush crept up Mia's neck. Of course, how many times had Henderson bellowed "Rousseau" across the diner? Oh, right. She hesitated, feeling awkward. I don't know your name." He looked away, his gaze falling to the plate of food. The guardedness returned, a shutter falling over his clear blue eyes. "It doesn't matter." "It does to me," she said more boldly than she intended. "I can't just keep calling you. Well, you know." He was silent for a long moment, picking at a loose thread on his trousers. "You can call me Eli," he finally said, his voice low. "Eli," she repeated softly. It felt momentous, giving a name to the phantom in the alley. "It's nice to meet you, Eli." Their conversation started tentatively after that brief exchanges in the cold night air. She learned to read his moods. Some nights he was more open, asking quiet questions about her day. Other nights he would retreat into his shell of silence, and she knew not to push. He never ever spoke about himself. He was a master of deflecting questions. If she asked where he was from, he'd ask her about a book she was reading. If she hinted at what happened to his leg, he'd point out a constellation in the night sky. He was intelligent, frighteningly so. He'd quote Shakespeare from memory after she complained about a pretentious customer. He'd explain the complex physics of a flickering neon light. He'd listen to her talk about her mother's illness and then ask surprisingly insightful questions about her medication and treatment, showing a grasp of medical concepts that baffled her. Who was this man, a disgraced professor? A brilliant mind broken by tragedy? The questions swirled, but she respected his unspoken boundaries. He was Eli, the man in the alley. For now, that was enough. Meanwhile, Mia's world outside the alley was crumbling. Her mother had a bad turn. A trip to the emergency room, another battery of tests, and a new experimental medication that wasn't covered by their threadbare insurance. The bill that arrived in the mail felt like a physical blow, knocking the wind out of her. It was a 5-figure sum she couldn't possibly hope to pay. An eviction notice was taped to their apartment door a week later. Desperation began to gnaw at her, a cold, sickening feeling that never left. She took on extra shifts, working until she was swaying on her feet. The dark circles under her eyes became permanent fixtures. Her exhaustion made her clumsy. She dropped a tray loaded with coffee and cheesecake, the sound of shattering ceramic, making the entire diner fall silent. Henderson was on her in a second. "Russo, that's coming out of your pay. Every last cent, I swear you're more trouble than you're worth." Jessica smirked from behind the counter, polishing a glass that was already clean. Mia felt a hot, helpless anger rise in her throat. She wanted to scream, to tell him about the eviction notice, about her mother's failing health, about the sheer, crushing weight of it all. But she just bit her lip, her eyes stinging with tears, and knelt to pick up the broken shards. That night she had nothing to bring Eli. A new cook, Henderson's nephew, had meticulously scraped every last leftover into the trash bin right in front of her. All she had was an apple from her own lunch. She felt ashamed as she offered it to him. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice thick with unshed tears. "It's all I have tonight." Eli took the apple. He didn't look at it. He looked at her face, his blue eyes searching hers with an unnerving intensity. "What happened?" he asked, his voice gentle. And it all came pouring out. The dam of her composure finally broke, and she told him everything. The medical bills, the eviction, notice Henderson's cruelty, her bone-deep weariness, the terror of failing her mother. She sat on the cold concrete, heedless of the grime, and sobbed all the pain and fear of the past months, erupting in a raw, ragged display of grief. Eli was silent. He didn't offer platitudes or empty reassurances. He just sat there, his presence a solid, unmoving anchor in her storm. When her sobs finally subsided into shuddering breaths, he reached out, not with his hand, but with a small, folded piece of paper. It was a page torn from a book, dog-eared and worn. On it was a poem. She recognized the author, Rainer Maria Rilke. It was a verse about letting go, about enduring the night to reach the dawn. But it was the handwriting at the bottom that made her pause. In a neat, elegant script that was completely at odds with his appearance were the words, "The darkest hour is just before the dawn. Don't give up. I don't understand." She sniffled, looking from the paper to his face. "You have a good heart, Amelia," he said, his gaze unwavering. "That is rarer and more valuable than anything else in this world. Don't let them break you." His words, simple and direct, struck her more profoundly than any symphony of sympathy could have. He wasn't pitying her. He was seeing her. He was validating the one thing she still had left, her own character. She folded the piece of paper carefully and put it in her pocket, a talisman against the despair. The situation at the diner, however, was about to escalate. Jessica, ever the opportunist, saw Mia's desperation as a chance to finally get rid of her. She began a subtle campaign of sabotage. A ticket order would go missing, and Jessica would suggest Mia had forgotten it. A customer's complaint about slow service would be directed toward Mia's section, even if it wasn't hers. The final straw came on a Friday payday. Henderson called Mia into his greasy little office. Jessica stood by the door, a look of triumphant concern on her face. Russo Henderson began not meeting her eye. "We have a problem. The till from your shift last night was short. $50 short. Mia's blood ran cold." "What, that's not possible." I balanced it myself. It was perfect. "Well, the money's not there," he said, tapping a pen on his desk. "And Jessica mentioned seeing you take money from the tip jar earlier in the week." "I was making change," Mia cried, turning to Jessica. "You were standing right there. You saw me put the 20 back in." Jessica just shrugged, looking at the floor. "I don't know, Mia. You've been so stressed lately. People make mistakes when they're desperate." The insinuation was clear. Vile. Poisonous. "I didn't steal anything," Mia said, her voice trembling with rage. "I would never." "Look," Henderson sighed, leaning back in his chair, which squeaked in protest. "I can't have a thief working for me. And frankly, with all the broken plates and the crying, you're becoming a liability. I'm going to have to let you go." The words hit her like a physical slap. Fired. Accused of being a thief. The eviction notice. Her mother. It was the end of the line. She was going to lose everything. "No, please," she begged the fight draining out of her, replaced by sheer panic. "Mr. Henderson, please, I need this job. It was a mistake. I can pay the $50 back, I swear." "It's too late for that." Henderson said, a smug finality in his tone. "Clean out your locker. I'll mail you your final check." Defeated, humiliated, and utterly broken, Mia turned to leave. Tears streamed down her face as she stumbled out of the office and into the diner. She was finished. As she walked past the back door, her gaze fell upon the alley. Her last thought was of Eli. What would happen to him? Who would feed him now? It was a strangely painful thought, a final twist of the knife. Her small act of kindness was the last thing she had, and now even that was being taken away. She didn't know that the man in the alley had heard every word. The diner's back door had been propped open to air out the kitchen smoke, and the raised angry voices from Henderson's office had carried clearly into the night. And as Mia walked away, a profound change was taking place in the figure huddled in the shadows. The slumped shoulders straightened. The haunted look in the clear blue eyes was replaced by a cold, hard fire. He pushed himself to his feet, his movements stiff but deliberate. He stood wobbled for a moment, and then found his balance. The crippled beggar was gone. In his place stood a man who was about to bring the whole rotten world of the Corner Nook diner crashing down. Mia fumbled with the small lock on her locker, her hands shaking so violently she could barely fit the key. Each clatter of metal against metal sounded like a gavel striking down on her life. Her meager possessions were inside a spare apron, a worn copy of a nursing textbook, the small polished stone Eli had given her, and the folded piece of paper with the Rilke poem. They felt like artifacts from a different life. Jessica walked past, a cruel little smile playing on her lips. "Tough break," she said, her voice dripping with insincere sympathy. "But don't worry. I'm sure you'll land on your feet. Or maybe you won't." Mia didn't have the energy to respond. She just wanted to disappear. She pulled her things out, stuffing them into her tote bag, the shame so heavy it was a physical weight on her shoulders. She was a thief. That's what they'd all think. The label would follow her, a stain she could never wash out. Henderson waddled out of his office. "Are you done yet, Russo? I need to lock up." "I'm going," she mumbled, slinging the bag over her shoulder. Her final walk of shame across the checkerboard floor of the diner felt a mile long. The few remaining customers stared. The cook averted his gaze. She was an outcast. She pushed open the heavy glass door and stepped out into the night, the flickering neon sign now seeming to mock her. She was about to turn toward the bus stop when the diner's back door, the one leading to the alley, swung open with a loud bang. A figure emerged from the darkness. It was Eli. But it wasn't the Eli she knew. He was standing tall, his back straight. He still wore the tattered clothes and her too small jacket, but he moved with a purpose, a commanding presence that seemed to suck all the air out of the space around him. He walked with a limp, yes, a noticeable drag in his right leg, but he was not crippled. Not the broken man from the milk crate. He walked past the dumpsters and straight toward the diner's main entrance, his blue eyes fixed on the building with an icy intensity. Mia stared, utterly bewildered. "Eli, what are you doing? You shouldn't be—" He didn't seem to hear her. He pushed open the glass door and stepped inside the diner. Mia, driven by a confused, frantic curiosity, followed him. Henderson, who was locking the till, looked up in annoyance. "Hey, we're closed! Get out, you bum! I'm calling the cops!" Eli ignored him. He walked calmly to the center of the room, his gaze sweeping over the cheap booths and sticky tables as if he were assessing a property. His limp was pronounced, but it didn't diminish the aura of authority that now radiated from him. "I said, get out!" Henderson yelled, his face turning a blotchy red. He started to come out from behind the counter. Jessica stood nearby, her mouth agape in shock. "You're Mr. Henderson." I presume Eli's voice was no longer the raspy whisper of the alley. It was a clear, resonant baritone that carried easily through the room. It was the voice of a man accustomed to being heard. "Who's asking?" Henderson sneered, puffing out his chest. "Security. That's who's asking. Get out before I have you thrown out. You just fired one of your employees." Eli stated his voice, dangerously calm. "Amelia Russo." He gestured with his head toward Mia, who was hovering by the door, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. "You accused her of stealing $50. It's none of your damn business," Henderson spat. "She's a thief and a charity case." "Now get out," Eli took another step forward. "She is the most honest person in this building." "And you," he said, his eyes locking onto Henderson's, "are a petty tyrant who gets his kicks from bullying a woman who is worth 10 of you." His gaze then flicked to Jessica. "And you are a malicious little coward." Jessica flinched, as if he had struck her. Henderson's face contorted with rage. "That's it. You're done." He reached for the phone on the counter. "I wouldn't do that if I were you," Eli said softly. Before Henderson could dial, 2 men in impeccably tailored black suits entered the diner. They moved with a quiet, unnerving efficiency, positioning themselves on either side of the entrance. They were built like professional athletes and had the grim expressions of men who didn't smile for a living. The entire atmosphere in the diner shifted from cheap and grimy to dangerously tense. Henderson froze his hand, hovering over the phone. Who are you people?" Eli reached into the inner pocket of the stained army jacket and pulled out a sleek, modern smartphone. With a few taps of his thumb, he made a call. He put it on speaker. A crisp, professional female voice answered immediately. "Mr. Vance, is everything all right?" Mia's mind snagged on the name. Vance, where had she heard that name? It was on the news in the business section of the paper. Vance Industries, the massive tech and real estate conglomerate that was practically rebuilding the city's skyline. "Everything is under control," Catherine Eli said into the phone. "I need you to do 2 things for me. First, contact my legal team. Have them draw up a termination contract for a Mr. Gerald Henderson, manager of a diner called The Corner Nook. The address is 14th and Elm. Cite gross mismanagement and unlawful termination of an employee. Spare no expense." Henderson's jaw dropped. His face went from red to a pasty, sickly white. Vance? You're not. Second Eli continued ignoring Henderson completely. I need you to contact the holding company that manages my smaller real estate assets. Find out who owns this building. If it's not us, buy it. I don't care what it costs. I'm standing in it right now, and I find the decor profoundly disappointing. The woman on the phone didn't miss a beat. Consider it done, Mr. Vance. We'll have preliminary ownership papers ready for you to sign within the hour. Thank you, Catherine. Eli ended the call. The silence in the diner was absolute. Jessica looked like she might faint. Henderson was sputtering, making small, choking sounds. Eli turned his full attention back to the terrified diner manager. He took another step forward, the slight drag of his leg the only sound in the room. "My name," he said, his voice dropping to a low, chilling whisper, "is Elias Vance." Mia's bag slipped from her shoulder and hit the floor with a dull thud. The polished stone and the nursing textbook spilled out onto the tiles. Elias Vance, the reclusive billionaire, the man who had inherited one of the largest fortunes in the country, the man who had reportedly vanished months ago after a horrific car accident, with rumors circulating that he was either dead or permanently incapacitated. This was the man she had been feeding leftover stew in a back alley. This was the man who had worn her threadbare jacket. Elias's gaze softened as he looked at Mia. He saw her shock, her utter disbelief. He took a step toward her, away from the wreckage of Henderson and Jessica's careers. "Amelia," he said, his voice now gentle, the authority replaced by a deep, pleading earnestness. "I know this is a lot to process. Can you give me a chance to explain?" Please, Henderson, finally finding his voice, let out a pathetic squeak. "Mr. Vance." "Sir, I had no idea. It was a misunderstanding. A terrible mistake. The girl Russo, she can have her job back with a raise." Please, Elias didn't even glance at him. His eyes were only on Mia. "This place is a memory, Amelia. You are never setting foot in here again, unless you want to own it." He held out his hand. It was clean now. The grime was gone. The nails were trimmed. It was the hand of a man who commanded boardrooms, not a man who huddled by dumpsters. Mia looked from his outstretched hand to his face. The face was the same, but the haunted look was gone, replaced by a raw vulnerability she recognized. It was the look he'd had the night she gave him her jacket. This wasn't an act. This was real, all of it. The squalor and the power. Her mind was a whirlwind of confusion, fear, and 1,000 unanswered questions. But looking into his clear blue eyes, she saw the same man she had shared her secrets with in the dark. She saw Eli. Slowly, hesitantly, she placed her trembling hand in his. His grip was warm and firm. "Okay, Eli," she whispered. "Explain." The ride from the diner was a surreal dream. One of the suited men, whose name was Marcus, had retrieved a gleaming black sedan from a nearby parking garage. The car was so quiet inside that Mia could hear her own frantic heartbeat. The leather seats were softer than any bed she'd ever slept on. She sat stiffly, her tote bag clutched in her lap, like a shield, watching the gritty streets of her neighborhood glide by through the tinted window. Elias sat beside her, the silence stretching between them. He had shed the tattered army jacket, leaving it on the diner floor. Underneath, he wore a simple, dark Henley shirt. It was worn but clean and of good quality. He had been a ghost hiding in plain sight. He directed the driver to a part of the city she had only ever seen in magazines. The buildings grew taller, sleeker, their glass and steel facades scraping the night sky. They pulled into a private underground entrance of a skyscraper that bore a discreet, elegant V logo. A private elevator took them straight up the ride, so smooth and fast her ears popped. The doors opened directly into a penthouse apartment, that was larger than the entire floor of her apartment building. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a breathtaking 180-degree view of Oakhaven's glittering expanse. The furniture was minimalist and modern. The art on the walls looked like it belonged in a museum, and the sheer scale of the space was dizzying. Mia walked slowly to the center of the room, feeling like an alien who had landed on a foreign planet. This was Elias's world, a world of unimaginable wealth and power, a world away from cold alleys and greasy spoons. A woman in a sharp business suit, the Catherine from the phone, was waiting for them. She had a tablet in her hand and a professional, serene expression. "Mr. Vance? Welcome back. The acquisition of the diner property is underway. Legal has been briefed." She glanced at Mia with a polite but curious look. "Thank you, Catherine." "That'll be all for tonight," Elias said. His tone was weary. "Of course, sir, and your mother has called twice. She's very anxious to hear from you. I'll call her in the morning. Please tell her I'm safe." Catherine nodded and departed, as silently as she had appeared. The quiet returned heavier than before. Mia finally turned to face him, her confusion hardening into a knot of anger and betrayal. "My mother," she asked, her voice sharp. "You have a mother who is worried about you, and you've been letting her think, what, that you were dead, while you were playing dress-up as a homeless person." The accusation hit him. He visibly flinched. "It's complicated, Amelia. Complicated." She laughed, a short, bitter sound. "You think I just spent the last 3 months giving my leftover food to a billionaire? I cried to you because I was getting evicted, while you were probably sitting on a real estate portfolio the size of a small country. So yeah, I'd say it's a little complicated." She started pacing her energy, frantic. Was this some kind of game? A social experiment? Let's see if the poor, pathetic waitress has a heart of gold. Was I a character in your story? Did you and your rich friends have a good laugh about it? No, he said, his voice cracking with emotion. He took a step toward her but stopped when she recoiled. "No, Amelia, never. It was never a game." He gestured to his leg. "This was real. The limp is real. The pain is real." He walked over to a sleek, modern sofa and sank into it, his face etched with a deep weariness. 6 months ago, I was in a car crash. A bad one. My driver, a good man named Robert, was killed. I was pulled from the wreckage just before it exploded. He looked down at his hands. I had multiple fractures, a severe concussion, and this leg, he patted his right thigh, was shattered. They had to rebuild my femur with titanium. The initial prognosis was that I might never walk again. I spent 2 months in a private hospital in Switzerland, a complete media blackout. Mia stopped pacing, listening in spite of her anger. "The thing is," he continued, his voice low, "it wasn't an accident. The brake lines on my car were cut, the security systems disabled. Someone tried to kill me, and they almost succeeded. And the list of people who would benefit from my death. It's not short." He looked up at her, his blue eyes pleading for her to understand. "My world. It's not like yours. It's filled with corporate sharks, backstabbing rivals, even family members who see me as a dollar sign instead of a person. While I was in that hospital helpless, I knew that whoever tried to kill me would try again if they knew I had survived. My security team, the few people I trust implicitly. Marcus is one of them. We staged my disappearance. The world thinks I'm either dead or a vegetable in a secure facility somewhere. So you came back here to Oakhaven. Why the alley? Why the disguise?" It was the perfect cover, he explained. Who looks twice at a homeless man who suspects a crippled beggar of being a threat? It gave me the freedom to move around the city, anonymously, to observe, to listen. To try and figure out who was behind the attack, without them knowing I was even in the game. My leg was still healing. I genuinely couldn't walk properly for the first month. The pain was immense. Huddling in that alley, being invisible, it was the safest place in the world for me. He let out a long, shuddering breath. But I didn't account for you. Mia wrapped her arms around herself, the anger warring with a reluctant wave of sympathy. What do you mean I chose that alley because it was deserted? Quiet. Then you showed up, with that bowl of stew. A faint smile touched his lips. I was terrified. I thought you were going to call the cops, report me. But you didn't. You just gave me the food and left. Every night. You never asked for anything. You talked to me not because you wanted something, but because you needed someone to listen. He stood up, limping towards her slowly. Really, I was more alone in my billion-dollar life than I ever was in that alley. My relationships were transactions. But you showed me a kindness that was completely pure. It had no agenda. You gave me your jacket when you were shivering yourself. You gave me your last apple when your world was falling apart. He was standing in front of her now. I heard what Henderson did tonight. What that woman Jessica did. When I heard you cry, that's when it was over. I couldn't hide anymore. I couldn't let them do that to you. Protecting you became more important than protecting myself. Mia's defenses began to crumble. She looked at this man, this powerful, hunted, complicated man, and saw the truth in his eyes. She saw the pain of his injuries, the loneliness of his position, and the genuine gratitude he felt toward her. Your leg, she said softly. You can walk. Better now. Weeks of physical therapy I was doing secretly in a rented warehouse at night. It's still not perfect. It may never be. But it's functional. He sighed. I broke my own rules for you, Amelia. I revealed myself, which means whoever tried to kill me now knows I'm alive, and they know that I was in that alley, which means they might know about you. The implication hit her with the force of a physical blow. Her own problems, the eviction, the job suddenly seemed small. She had stumbled into a world of corporate espionage and assassination attempts. She wasn't just a poor waitress anymore. She was a liability, a target. And what about my mother? Mia asked, her voice barely a whisper. The reality of her own life came rushing back. The eviction, the bills. Elias's expression softened completely. That's over. All of it. Consider it gone. I've already had my financial team contact the hospital. They're settling your mother's entire bill, every cent. And a medical transport team is on its way to your apartment right now. They're moving her to the Harrison Wing. It's the best private care facility in the state. The top neurologists in the country will be consulting on her case. Tears welled in Mia's eyes, but this time they weren't tears of sorrow or frustration. They were tears of overwhelming, incomprehensible relief. You did that? It was the very first thing I did after I called Catherine, he said simply. Your kindness saved me, Amelia. In more ways than you know. Let me take care of this for you. Let me keep you safe. She looked around the vast, empty penthouse. It was a beautiful prison, a gilded cage. She had been saved from her sinking life raft, only to be placed in the middle of a battlefield she didn't understand. She was grateful, terrified, and utterly lost. What happens now? She asked. Now, Elias said, his voice grim. We find out who wants me dead, and we make sure they can't hurt anyone ever again. The next few days were a blur of disorientation for Mia. She lived in a guest suite in Elias's penthouse that was larger and more luxurious than any hotel she'd ever seen. She had a closet full of clothes that had been purchased for her, a phone with a direct line to Elias's security, and food prepared by a private chef. Yet she felt more trapped than ever. The true gift, the one that anchored her, was the news about her mother. Elias had arranged for her to visit the Harrison wing. The facility was less like a hospital and more like a 5-star resort with sunlit rooms, gardens, and an army of cheerful, competent staff. For the first time in years, Mia saw a spark of the old Maria Russo in her mother's eyes. The new doctors were optimistic. They spoke of therapies and treatments that had previously been unthinkable. The relief was so profound, it was a physical sensation, a weight lifting from Mia's chest that she hadn't realized she was carrying. He's a good man, this Elias. Her mother had whispered her speech already a little clearer. You be careful, Mia Cara. Men like that, they live in a dangerous world. Her mother's words were prophetic. Elias's world was one of strategy meetings, encrypted calls, and the constant unnerving presence of Marcus and his security team. Elias brought her into his study, a room lined with books and dominated by a large desk with multiple monitors. He laid out the whole ugly picture. The prime suspect was Julian Croft, the ruthless CEO of Croft Holdings, Vance Industries' main competitor. Croft was a man known for his hostile takeovers and scorched earth business tactics. Julian and I grew up together, Elias explained, pointing to a photo of 2 young men in polo shirts on a sailboat. Our families were friends, then rivals. He's always been ambitious, but in the last few years, it turned into something darker. We were competing for a massive government contract to develop next-generation clean energy infrastructure. It would have secured our company's dominance for the next 50 years. My accident happened 1 week before the final bids were due. With me out of the picture, Croft won the contract by default. So you have a motive, Mia said, absorbing the information. But do you have proof? That's the problem, Elias said, rubbing his temples. Julian is smart. He uses layers of cutouts and shell corporations. We can't trace the money used to hire the mechanic who cut my brakes back to him directly. It's a dead end. While Elias and his team focused on complex financial forensics and digital trails, Mia felt useless. She was the reason he was exposed, the reason the clock was ticking. She couldn't read a financial statement, and she didn't understand corporate law, but she did understand people. And she remembered the alley. Eli, she said one afternoon, interrupting a tense meeting between him and his head of security. When you were there, in the alley, was there anyone else, regulars, people you saw every day? The head of security, a stern man named Foster, looked at her with polite dismissal. Mom, we've swept the area. There's no credible threat there. But Elias looked at her, truly listening. There were a few. An old woman who collected cans, a group of kids who used the wall for graffiti, and there was a man, a delivery driver, drove a white van for a company called Citywide Couriers. He was there almost every afternoon around 3 o'clock, made a delivery to the butcher shop on the corner. Mia's mind started working. Did you ever see his face? Not clearly. Always wore a baseball cap, sunglasses. Kept to himself. Something clicked for Mia, a faint memory from her own life of drudgery. The 3 o'clock hour, that was when the diner was slowest, right before the dinner rush. She was often on her break, then sitting out on the back steps. I've seen him, Mia said slowly. White van. But I saw him other times too. Not just at 3. Sometimes he'd be there late at night when I was leaving, just sitting in his van down the street. I always thought it was weird. Foster, the security head, was still skeptical. A delivery driver working late, ma'am. It's not unusual. But it's a courier service, Mia insisted, feeling a surge of confidence. They don't typically make deliveries at 11 o'clock at night. And another thing. The butcher shop he supposedly delivered to closes at 6. Why would a courier be hanging around the alley hours after his delivery was made? Elias looked at Foster. Check it out. Cross-reference every citywide courier's employee with any known associates of Julian Croft. Dig into their financials. Now, it was the first thread, and Mia had been the one to provide it. The feeling was empowering. She wasn't just the damsel in distress, she had a role to play. The team dug. It turned out the driver, a man named Frank Miller, had a gambling problem and a mountain of debt. A week before Elias's accident, an anonymous shell corporation had paid off his entire debt. A corporation that, after 2 days of relentless digging by Elias's team, was found to have tenuous hidden links to a subsidiary of Croft Holdings. He wasn't a delivery driver. Elias said, his eyes alight with a cold fire. He was a spotter. He was watching me. Or he was watching the alley, waiting for me to show up there. Julian must have known my location all along. The question was, why hadn't Croft made a move? He was waiting. Mia theorized, her voice quiet. He won the big contract. Killing you then would have been too suspicious. He was probably waiting for the dust to settle to make it look like a random street crime. But then, I showed up. I started visiting you every day. I became a witness. Her presence had inadvertently protected him. By showing him kindness, she had made him a much harder target. Now they had to lure the snake out of its hole. Elias's plan was audacious. He would announce his return to the world. He would call an emergency shareholders meeting and challenge the legitimacy of the clean energy contract awarded to Croft, claiming new evidence of corporate sabotage. He'll have to react, Elias said. He can't let that evidence come to light. He'll try to silence me for good before that meeting. And this time we'll be ready for him. It was a dangerous gambit, and Julian Croft made his move sooner than anyone expected. He didn't target Elias. He targeted Mia. The day before the scheduled announcement, Mia was visiting her mother. She had dismissed her security detail for the afternoon, wanting a few hours of normalcy. As she left the Harrison wing, a white van, the same model as the courier van, pulled up beside her. Before she could react, 2 men grabbed her, covering her mouth and pulling her inside. It all happened in a blur. She fought, she kicked, but they were too strong. As the van sped away, a man in a tailored suit who had been sitting in the back leaned forward. She didn't recognize him, but his cold, predatory smile made her blood run cold. It had to be Julian Croft. Amelia Russo, he said, his voice smooth as silk. Elias's little charity project. He's made a grave mistake coming back from the dead, and an even bigger one getting you involved. You're going to be the instrument of his downfall. But Croft had made a mistake too. He had underestimated Mia, and he had grossly underestimated Elias Vance's protective instincts. The moment she had dismissed her security, Marcus had tagged her coat with a microscopic GPS tracker. Elias's orders. As Croft's van raced toward an abandoned warehouse district, Elias was in a helicopter, a team of his best security personnel, with him, tracking her every move. They weren't waiting for the police. This was personal. The confrontation was swift and brutal. Croft's men were professionals, but Elias's team, led by Marcus, were elite. They stormed the warehouse where Croft was holding Mia. Croft, seeing his plan unravel, grabbed Mia, holding a gun to her head. "It's over." Julian Elias's voice boomed from the entrance. He stood there flanked by his men, his face a mask of controlled fury. It's over when I say it is. Croft screamed, his composure shattered. You took everything from me, my family's legacy. You think I'd let you come back and undo it all? Mia's heart was hammering, the cold steel of the gun pressed against her temple. But she wasn't the same woman who had cried over a broken plate. She looked at Elias, then at the desperate, sweating face of Julian Croft, and she remembered the man in the alley, the survivor. In that split second, she did the one thing Croft didn't expect. She stomped down hard on his instep with the heel of her boot. He roared in pain, his grip loosening for a fraction of a second. It was all Elias needed. He had a gun in his hand, not aimed at Croft, but at a stack of heavy, unsecured metal barrels on a shelf above him. He fired once. As the police finally called to the scene, led a screaming, defeated Julian Croft away. Elias rushed to Mia's side. He wrapped his arms around her, holding her tightly. "Are you okay?" he whispered into her hair, his voice trembling slightly. She nodded, burying her face in his chest, the adrenaline finally giving way to bone-deep exhaustion. "I am now." In the aftermath, the full extent of Croft's crimes was revealed. The energy contract was nullified, and Vance Industries soared to new heights. But for Mia and Elias, the business victories were secondary. Elias proved that his gratitude wasn't just about grand gestures. He established the Maria Russo Foundation, a massive non-profit dedicated to funding research and providing care for patients with neurological disorders. He put Mia on the board not as a figurehead, but as a managing director, trusting her compassion and first-hand experience to guide its mission. He funded her dream, not by just paying for it, but by building a new state-of-the-art pediatric nursing wing at the city hospital, which she would help design and run. One evening, months later, they stood on the balcony of the penthouse, looking out at the city lights. The chaos was over. Their new life had begun. "You know," Mia said softly, leaning against him. "Sometimes I miss the alley." Elias smiled, turning to look at her. "You miss the cold, the dirt, and the terrible food?" "No," she said, her brown eyes sparkling. "I miss the quiet. I miss the man who would listen to me for hours and say nothing. The man who gave me a polished stone because it was all he had." Elias reached into his pocket and pulled out the old, tattered piece of paper with the Rilke poem. He had salvaged it from her locker that night. Then from his other pocket, he produced the smooth grey stone. "I still have them," he said, "to remind me that my entire fortune is worthless compared to one small act of kindness from a stranger." He took her hand. "I was a billionaire, hiding as a beggar. But you, Amelia Russo, with nothing to your name, were the richest person I had ever met." He didn't have to be a beggar anymore, and she didn't have to be a waitress. But in that moment, they were still just Eli and Amelia, two souls who had found each other in the darkness of a lonely city alley. Amelia's story teaches us a powerful lesson that we often forget in our busy lives. You can never judge a book by its cover. The homeless man on the street, the tired waitress, the silent stranger, everyone is fighting a battle we know nothing about. Her kindness wasn't an investment. It was a reflection of her character. She gave without ever expecting to receive, and in the end, she received a world she could never have imagined. But the true reward wasn't the money or the penthouse. It was finding a person who saw her for who she truly was. What would you have done in her shoes? It makes you think, doesn't it? If this story touched your heart, please give this video a like and share it with someone who might need a reminder that kindness is its own reward. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell for more real-life stories that will inspire and move you. Thank you for listening.